Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've been on the podcast before, so we know all your backstory. And Robyn is joining us for the first time today because I met Robyn in Philadelphia. It's been about a month and a half ago now, and was very interested in a research project that she's doing. And before we get to that, though, our traditional first question is, how did you get into beekeeping?
Okay. Ever since I was a kid, I knew I loved insects, and actually one of my neighbors predicted when I was about 7 that that's what I would end up being when I grew up, because I would, be the one to rescue the cricket from her basement or whatever. And then when I was going to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do either babies or bugs. So every school I chose had to have the major of, pediatric medicine and entomology. And I ended up at the University of Delaware undeclared because I was also too cool to say that I wanted to study insects, because teenagers are like that. But I went for it. I took an entomology class the first semester, loved it, declared the major. I studied entomology with Dewey Caron, who's a bee researcher, and ended up taking his class called apidology, which was amazing to me that you could have a whole entire 3-credit class with a lab on just one species, and everything I learned was fascinating. So that's where the love began.
Awesome. Well, so the reason why I was interested in your project is because we have these studies that have been published about small cell beekeeping, and I've been kind of disappointed in them because they really only tested for mite numbers, and I'm kind of notorious for refusing to test for mites because I don't feel that it tells me anything I need to know. Because what I really need to know is whether or not the bees are going to survive, not how many mites they have, because they might be able to survive with a bunch of mites. But your project is seeking to do a much more long-term project with 3 different groups. Why don't you describe the groups to us?
Okay, so the groups are management systems for bees. So if you look at what beekeepers do, they sort of shake out into categories. And so that's what I'm trying to emulate with my work, what beekeepers are really doing. And so one of the groups we're calling conventional. And my definition of convention is not what has always been done, but what is being done by a lot of people.
What everybody's doing.
Normal beekeeping or whatever is conventional to me. So that would allow the beekeeper to use any possible registered pesticides, because it's legal, and using standard equipment and things like that. And then there's a second group that falls more in the middle of the beekeeping continuum, which we're calling IPM. So that stands for Integrated Pest Management. And a beekeeper in that group would not use the hard chemicals, but the soft chemicals are still available, like formic acid, oxalic acid, maybe some cultural control methods like drone brood removal, maybe using a screen bottom board, things like that, to try to get rid of mites. And then the third group is, you could call it small cell treatment free, but we're calling it chemical free because because of the what is a treatment thing. So no chemical treatments whatsoever, no matter what. So that's the one that you got excited about, right?
That's
because I'm studying
about.
that. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, because I don't think you've explained it, especially not to this group yet, but what treatments are you going to be using for the first 2 groups?
That is a good question. Because this is research, I feel like I definitely should use Amatraz in the conventional colonies at least once. I think oxalic acid vapor, when there's a broodless period in winter, certainly will get used. Although I could use antibiotics in the conventional treatment, I don't think that I will because of the recent need for a vet. Beekeepers don't technically use them anymore because it costs more to call a vet in to say you can use antibiotics on your hive than to just burn it and buy a new one. So I think antibiotics are kind of going to go by the wayside.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
From a certain perspective.
Yeah. So definitely formic acid, oxalic acid are my go-to for the IPM. Maybe throw in some Thymol. But, IPM is all about sort of rotating and using all kinds of different methods.
Only treating when necessary.
Only treating when necessary, when you reach a threshold
That's
and that kind of stuff.
Okay. So I'm just going to go something a bit less conventional because of my proclivities to sort of watch debates and fights. Not physical fights. But so tell me about some of the opposition that you've heard from all the groups.
So, before I started with this large project, I did a small project that ended up being preliminary to this. And I was afraid to try treatment-free beekeeping. Because mostly the people that I talked to were conventional people. And however, I had been leaning toward more organic methods and met people that did treatment-free. And I noticed that instead of coming to the beekeeping club meeting, they would have a separate meeting. And they would just go out to dinner and chat amongst themselves. And whenever they would come along to a meeting, arguments would begin. Mm-hmm. And it became clear to me that the treatment-free folks will certainly stop coming to the meetings. Who wants to go somewhere knowing that they're going to have a fight? And I also realized that once they went home, they just did whatever they wanted anyway. Like, no matter what was being taught at that meeting, they were like, whatever, I'm just going to do it my way. Mm-hmm. And so it's sad to me to have a group of beekeepers that are trying to do really good things sort of shoved to the side, mm-hmm. or feeling like they're on the outside. And with, good reason, because they're sort of made fun of, or their eyes are rolled at them. And I've seen it, and I've heard stories, but I've also seen it myself. And I feel like this research could really bridge the gap between, make a bridge of friendship if we can show that maybe all these types of beekeeping are good, or maybe this group isn't the cause of what that group thinks, so I'm kind of hopeful that this information will get to the right ears.
See, to me, what you're observing is sad, because I've seen this happen where the club actually ends up splitting and the treatment-free people start their own club because they just get tired of going to a meeting where all they talk about is chemicals and feeding and feeding and feeding and chemicals, and then when they complain that they actually want to talk about beekeeping, then they get yelled at for being treatment free, and so they just go, well, we're just going to start our own club.
Oh yeah.
But the thing I hate about it is we're all beekeepers. Why can't we sit around and talk about bees? Because we still have an awful lot in common. It seems sad to split the thing up, because I could, even if the guy's a treater, I could still learn a lot about, what he thinks about when they're going to build up in my location, or when what he observes in his hives as far as other things like when the flow hits, and things that might be really useful to me, and I might have some things that would be really useful to him, and instead it all turns into arguments about you're not treating, so therefore you're the reason my bees are dying, and that kind of crap. So,
Well, that's one of the things that always bugs me in the Facebook group is I really just, it's treatment-free beekeeping. It's really beekeeping. The treatment-free is just the descriptor. We should be able to talk about beekeeping and leave the treatment part out of it. But when the rare is the treating beekeeper who is able to have a reasonable conversation in the group without trying to sneak in something that you should do. Oh, everything will be fine if you just treat with oxalic acid on such and such a day. It's like, well, okay, but that's not what we're doing here. Let's talk about just the beekeeping. So it gets to be difficult that way. Do you have, well, I mean, you've heard a lot of, you just got done, for everybody else's reference, you just got done giving like a 2-hour talk on this and hearing a lot of critique. How have you been taking all that? Has it changed your mind about things? Are you just proceeding, you doing your own thing anyway?
Well, to be honest, I set my mind to there's going to be a lot of people that don't like what I'm doing. And I went into it a little bit scared, just thinking that I was going to get backlash. And to be honest, I haven't been getting that. So I talked to the bee researchers at a meeting in January, and I was waiting to get backlash from them. And instead, they came up to me and they said, "I'm really glad you're doing this work. I'm glad this really needs to be done." Like people that you wouldn't expect to say that. So I was totally thrilled after that meeting. And then coming into this meeting, I was like, okay, here it is, the other side. Now I'm going to get the backlash that I'm expecting. And that didn't happen either. So honestly, like as a scientist, you learn how to take constructive criticism. So all the critiques have been very constructive. People are worried about, well, how are you going to have the manpower to do that? That's a reality of my life. So I don't feel like offended by a comment like that, or whatever critique there have been. I need to think through those things because, as a scientist, if you're going to go publish, your peers have to accept all the work that you did. So it's better to have the critiques at the beginning than say after you did it and you screwed up. You had a bad design for your project. That's devastating. But to hear stuff now when I still have a chance to tweak something, there was a lot of talk today about how much I'm going to be feeding my bees. Well, that's going to start in a little over a month. So I still have a chance to choose how much I feed them. So I very much appreciate that people were open and willing to criticize me, actually.
I'm looking forward to it because it solves a lot of the issues. You can't solve every issue, that's just reality, but it solves an awful lot of the issues that have plagued previous studies on especially small cell, but even on treatment free. If most of them tend to be too short, they tend to be too few hives, they tend to try to isolate one thing in a way that then breaks the system. The system of treatment-free beekeeping isn't just one thing, and all of these studies, because they want to be scientific, they want to try and measure that one thing. But I'm not sure that's possible to come up with something meaningful by doing one thing. So I think you're on the right track. Like I said, unfortunately, you can't make it first of all, you've got that whole spectrum. You got the treater here who's using all kinds of chemicals constantly, down to the treater who's only treating, twice a year, and the IPM guy who's only doing drone removal, and another one that's using formic and oxalic and whatever. And you got the whole spectrum, but almost all of these people have some kind of a system that isn't just one thing. So you're kind of taking three systems. You pick something kind of in the middle of what they're doing, and I think that's going to be, even though you almost have to have a million different combinations to cover everything. I think you've got it down to three basic philosophies and a typical scenario of what people with that philosophy are doing. And I think that's a good way to do it. And you're doing it with enough hives and over a long enough period of time that I think you'll have some meaningful results. Where most of them have been, 4 or 5 hives or 50 hives or maybe 100 hives, and either just for 6 months or just for 2 months or for 2 years, 300 hives. It's not perfect. I'd like to see 10 years and 1,000 hives, but you take what you can get. 300 hives in 2 years, that's a heck of a start. So I'm looking forward to it.
My biggest concern from when I first heard about it was that you'd be trying to please too many people and end up making everybody angry. And especially I don't really follow the treating community very closely, but especially in the treatment-free community, there are a lot of factions that have developed over time. Seems to me the latest one that has emerged is people who eschew any sort of artificial breeding or any sort of artificial splitting. They only want swarms or something. So, and then you've maybe a bigger group of people who refuse to treat and don't think anybody else, or not treat, feed, refuse to feed anything at all and don't think anybody else should either. And so my focus has been to try and build the tent as big as possible to include as many people as possible. And so that was my concern, because it can get so fractious at times. Are you seeing anything like that? Or do you feel frustrated from everybody telling you to do different things in every direction?
I've gotten a little bit of that, and it is difficult. So for one example, tons of people have been asking me, why aren't you using 8 frame equipment instead of 10? You need the smaller hive because of what Seeley said. And then I come here and everybody's like, bigger hives, bigger brood nests are better. So is bigger better? Is smaller better? Well, it's much easier to keep them all 10 frame for me for now. So I'm not studying the effect of the equipment.
But you're also doing all medium frames, aren't you?
I don't really think the depth of the frames matters one bit.
I don't either. I'm just that's becoming a popular thing as well, thanks to Mike.
There are people who think it matters, and they're adamant that you have to have deeps, and they can't ever succeed on mediums. There's some Australian guy on one of the forums. He's just adamant. It's just they'll never do well on medium frames. Well, bees do well in all kinds of situations. I don't think they should, but they do. Mm. I don't think it matters that much. I've seen them in dried up gas tanks. They don't seem to. Right. It doesn't seem to matter that much.
But as far as the factions go, I think that the best decision we made was to have a stakeholder group as the backer of us. So we brought people together to discuss their beekeeping methods. And I was not at any single one of those tables that we're discussing. I wasn't influencing the result. All I had was the questions. What kind of bottom board should be used? And there was a whole list, what do you do about Varroa? What do you do about this? And they had to work among themselves. So there was, some disagreement within those groups, but the goal of the entire day was to get through the list and have a compromise for each thing. So on the one hand, I wish I could have physically been at each one of those tables for the whole entire day, because I would have understood, the backstory and what the fighting was and how they ended up at that decision. But the reality was I was hands off for the whole entire thing. And maybe that was good. The fact that people doing this type of beekeeping told me what they think is the most average thing to do, it gives me a lot of comfort. And I've since come back to those groups and had these group Skype meetings to be okay, I've been really thinking about this decision that you guys made, and I want to talk it through with you and make sure that that's really what I should do. And a few things have changed since then. For example, the trimming of the frames. Originally I was going to do that. And then I asked the group, I'm like, but are you guys actually doing that? And of the people that said they tried it, they said that they found it didn't work well for them. That the bees, for example, would draw one comb out way far and not draw the other one. And that keeping them the natural, that's not natural, whatever the normal frames are, worked better. So I said, okay, if you guys aren't doing it, I'm not going to do it. So I took that out. So that's really awesome to have these groups to kind of revisit things, as I think about them, because I've thought about all of these systems far too much.
And what you're describing is for the small cell group, you're using the man-like plastic frames, and you're trimming off, the frames, you're trimming off the frame part, leaving the foundation part, but you're making the foundation part shorter to give gaps for drone brood.
But the part she's talking about now is whether or not these narrow frames.
Narrow frames. Okay.
3/8. And she's
right.
They went with
but all of that came from the stakeholder group. You're right. So the idea of trimming the frames down to 1 1/4, I'm not doing, but I am making sure that the foundation has space so that they can make drones. And that came out of the group. I'm very glad that was discussed, because it would have been so simple to just put in all this worker foundation and be done with it.
Well, I've kind of done that. It's on the bottom though, not the top or the sides.
Yeah.
But yeah, the narrow frame, I've had really mixed results with that. So there are a lot of people that want to try it, that want to do it, but I don't think it's definitely not the majority at this point.
And what I'm trying to do is what most people are doing right now. I'm not trying to tell anybody what a treatment-free beekeeper should do. I'm trying to be told and do the best compromise for that system.
Well, at this point, I've spent quite a number of hours with you, and you seem to be very open to suggestions, and like you've. It's actually kind of exciting for some of us, because you listen where the previous studies show that no one has listened before. And so just to have somebody who's willing to take actual practice into account is, I think, a really big thing.
Thanks.
I just hope you prove something.
That's part of what's baffled me about a lot of these previous studies is somebody who says, oh, we're going to do a small cell study. They never talk to anybody who's doing small cell.
Exactly. And you can see that in the paper.
Well, you can see it by the problems they encountered that we could have helped them avoid. Like Seeley trying to get the comb drawn. He's trying to get small cell wax foundation drawn during a flow in a super.
Yeah, that's the big one.
And all of us who've ever attempted this could tell him it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. He could have asked there's thousands of treatment-free small cell beekeepers who could have told him this will never work. And yet they wasted all this time trying to get it drawn, finally gave up, went with the honey supercell because at least it was already drawn, and then did this plastic honey supercell versus the wax large cell. And I'm not saying that necessarily is the reason that he got the results he got, but I don't think it kind of invalidates some of the apples to apples. You don't want to be doing apples to oranges. Well, why did that happen? Because he didn't talk to anybody and ask them how are you guys doing this? How do you get this done? How do you accomplish this? And then run it by them after you come up with an idea of how you're going to do it. Run it by somebody who's actually doing this and succeeding, and say, this is what I'm going to do. What do you think of that? And you might tell them, oh, I think that's going to fail totally. or you might say, oh, well, that doesn't sound too bad, but you might want to change this and this. But none of them ever talked to anybody, obviously, from the way the studies went. So, no, I think you started out on the right track, and I think you got the essentials. And the essentials are probably whether you're doing narrow frames or 8-frame boxes is probably irrelevant. I think they make a little difference. I don't think they make a big difference. There's a lot of the things that make the big difference you're covering. So, I think having drones in there is a big difference. And you're doing that. And having the small cell foundation, I think, is a big difference. And you're doing that. And I don't think it matters whether they're deeps or mediums. I don't think it matters if they're. Tell you the truth, I think the two best depths for a frame anyway are the deeps or the mediums, because the mediums, the queen just moves from box to box and never even hesitates. And the deeps, she'll get stuck in this bottom box and won't move because she doesn't want to move off of this comb and make the gap to the next box. Because it's like almost deep enough for her. She's doing this little circle like this, and it's almost deep enough. So she doesn't quite want to make the jump to the next box. And then she finally does make the jump to the next box, and now she's doing this, and she doesn't really want to make the jump back. So she tends to kind of hesitate. In mediums, she just moves to the next. She's laying in 3 boxes all at the same time. She's not even hesitating. So actually, I think deeps are the worst depth. I think the two. It's funny how often two extremes accomplish the same thing. Really, I mean, I could give you a culinary one. If you want meat to be tender, you do one of two things. You either cook it really, really fast and really hot, or you cook it really, really slow. And if you do it in between, it'll be tough as leather. But if you do one of those two extremes, it'll come out nice and tender. So which one's right? Well, they both work, but the middle of the road doesn't work. It's it's Mr. Miyagi. Right side of the road, fine. Left side of the road, fine. Middle of the road, squish like grape. That was his. You got to do it or not do it. Well, there's things that are like that. Where the two extremes work really well, because in this case, the queen's motivated to move to the next box because this obviously isn't big enough. There's no indecision. And the deep is just deep enough to get to do. It works. And then the deep is not quite big enough, but it puts her in this indecision. And the indecision is getting a lot of things bees do is decisions, and if they hesitate on those decisions, sometimes it's disastrous. Sometimes it'll get them killed because they hesitated to make the decision. Are we going to swarm? Or are we not going to swarm? I don't know. What are we doing, guys? Are we going to start putting away nectar in it yet? Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. They got to make a decision. You can see this if you have an observation hive. You can see them kind of hesitating at times, where they're just there's this lull, and then they make up their mind, and then all of a sudden everything kicks into gear, and they're focused on that, and everything starts to happen. So as far as those decisions, I think you did great. I think it'll work fine.
Speaking to the frame depth, I've seen a lot of people experimenting with or testing a return to deeper frames. In fact, the last episode that was just published to the podcast was a guy who was talking about doing Lands hives using 2 mediums frames sideways. So that was kind of interesting. Anyway,
I think it comes back to I've seen bees survive in so many different thrive in so many different situations. I really don't think, as much as I see little differences, and I'm always trying to tweak all those little differences, a lot of them aren't that critical. I think they overwinter a little better in 8-frame boxes than 10-frame boxes. But is it significantly better? No, not really. It's not that big a deal.
I do know my 14-frame boxes have not done particularly well overwintering. My big square boxes. They're only 14 because they're narrow frame also. They normally be 12. That's neither here nor there. Have you kind of generally heard a different... So I'm coming from the treatment-free area. Mm-hmm. Has the volume and character of the suggestions and criticism been similar from the other groups?
I gotta be careful here. Just to be totally honest, I feel that the conventional people were more interested in talking about the treatment-free people than vice versa.
Really?
A little bit. But in terms of, one interesting thing that happened is I invited, I think it was about 30 people, 30 Pennsylvania beekeepers, and in my mind I had, which category they were going to fall into that day. I didn't really tell them, okay, you're coming as a conventional beekeeper, you're coming as an IPM beekeeper. I didn't want to categorize them, but I did have a list and my suggested group in my mind. And then we had that in advance in case it was time to break out and somebody's like, hey, where do you want me? Right? That did happen. I invited all the Pennsylvania inspectors because I figured they had seen it all as inspectors. And some of them were like, where would you prefer me to be? Like I wanted to make sure there was a couple at each group, but almost everyone wanted to be, treatment free was clear, but otherwise everybody wanted to be IPM. And the conventional people, so we had to talk a lot about what is the difference between these two groups? And I was like, well, number one, are you willing to use Amatraz? If yes, you're conventional. If no, then you go to IPM. Like I had to draw the line at the hard chemicals were okay for one group, and you can absolutely not use them in the other group. So that was the only way I could get them to split. So some of the people were like, okay, I guess, yes, I would use it if I needed it. So, but that was really interesting to me because, to give, conventional chemical people some credit, they are shifting toward more organic, softer chemicals. So that's a very positive thing. Yeah. When I got to graduate school, that's when we were using Apistan and Coumaphos, and we, in our lab, were prophylactically giving everybody the Fumidil in their feed, and we also did the powdered sugar antibiotics 3 times in the spring, and that was all happening all the time. And I was just, all I had taken was 1 class, and I knew how to manage a colony, like I could tell you if it's queen right and stuff, but otherwise I didn't know the real ins and outs of beekeeping at all. So I just had the supervisor be like, okay, everybody's going to go out today and we're going to put on the Apistan or whatever, or we're going to do this. And so to me, I didn't know any better, so it was just normal to be doing all that. But I think beekeeping in general is moving away from that stuff. I think we've learned enough about how, there's no use treating for nosema because it's not that big of a deal, and the Fumidil doesn't help now that we have this Nosema ceranae recognized.
That actually makes it worse.
Right. And then, antibiotics, they've done away with that with the, need for a veterinarian. And so, and now that the mites are resistant to Apistan and Coumaphos, and the study that showed that it's contaminated all the wax, I think we're really coming around to more organic methods. So that was nice to see. So I learned a lot about, obviously I've been learning about what beekeepers do, more so than just being on the academic side and trying to think about how can I study this one thing. So it's been great.
I'm interested in how in your final write-up, how you're going to describe how you came to all, how did you get there from all of these people telling you all these different things to do? I mean, I gave my fair share of pluses and minuses. So how do you come to, where do you end up there?
I often think about the writing while I'm designing an experiment, right? So like, that's where, at first I was thinking about having different genetics in each system. And when I thought about writing that up, I was thinking about what the reviewers would say, and that turned me, the reality was I need to have the same genetics in all the colonies. And so I feel like everything I'm doing is shaped by what I think the reviewers are going to say on the paper, right? But I felt the decisions for the systems were simple because of the stakeholders. Thank God for them. But how I'm going to write that up, I don't think I need to justify why I've done it, but I think a huge table, which I actually already have written because it helps me to show, like these beekeepers that I've hired to help, I sent them the spreadsheet that shows the difference so they can see the big long list of things, and there's like yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, no, no, for everything you can imagine. And that's going to just have to be in the paper because it's not like I'm going to write paragraph after paragraph about what did each system do for this and what did each system do for that. That would be like super boring and long, but I think a table with that stuff. But yeah, and then like when did the management happen and how, why did you bring that up? I don't want to think about that.
I always find the soft spot and
You're poking me.
See, there's a bunch of that stuff. I want to see the informed bee, what is it, IBP, informed bee partnership.
Bee informed partnership.
Bee informed partnership, that's it. BIP. I'd like to see them break down the people who are treating and the people who aren't more, so that we can get a little better idea of what categories are what and what success there is, not just I treated or I didn't treat. Because just because I didn't treat doesn't mean I managed them well, and just because I did treat doesn't mean I treated correctly and or at the right time or whatever. So it's really hard if you're a beekeeper and you're trying to decide, am I going to treat or am I not going to treat? This is such a broad category of if I'm not going to treat, what am I going to do? And if I knew here's people who aren't treating and they're not feeding and they're not doing this and they're not doing that, and this is their success rate. Here's people who are not treating but they do feed and then this is their success rate. Then I could look at it as a beekeeper and make a better decision how I want to manage my bees. Now, the problem is they would have the same problem you have, but I think you've done a good job of distilling it down to some basics, not the whole thing, because there's just an infinite number of combinations people could come up with. But people do fall into some basic groups. The treatment-free, you can probably break into the two groups of the hands-off, I'm never going to touch them, I'm never going to feed them group, and then the ones that are, I'm going to feed them, I'm going to manage them, I'm going to split them, I'm going to try and keep them from swarming, but I'm not going to put any chemicals in there at all. And then you've got the IPM people who, well, yeah, I'll use some oxalic acid, I'll use some formic acid, maybe some thymol, but I'm not putting any systemic insecticides in here to kill mites. Even though they're labeled as acaricides, they're pretty much insecticides, and I'm not putting them in there. And then you got the, what's the next chemical? I want to know what it is so I can put it in my hive.
So I have a question for you then. You said you wanted to know about their success based on their management. What is your definition of success in beekeeping?
Well, obviously, if they're dead, that's not much success. So survival is probably a big one, and productivity would be the second one.
So honey production?
Interested in. Most people are interested in either production and or survival. Obviously, if they're dead, they don't produce anything. But
survival to what extent? Like how many do we want to survive?
Well, I don't care. I would just want to measure.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I just want to know if here's the guy who's dumping all the chemicals in. What's the survival rate? But you might even want to break that down a little bit. I treat in the once in the fall, or I treat every spring and every fall, or I treat every spring, every summer, and every fall. Something to give me an idea not just that they're treating, but how are they treating and what chemical are they using. But you don't want to get too detailed or it gets too broad and too hard to analyze. But if you kind of hit the main categories of here's somebody who's treating, 3 times a year, and they're using this and this, maybe they're rotating or maybe they're using the same thing all the time, whatever. But if you could at least get it into some broad categories, you could look at it and go, well, here's the people. Also, it'd be nice to break it out a little bit by experience level, I know.
It's so complex.
I know it's
so I have to
complex,
say, the Bee Informed Partnership database is such a plethora of information that I feel like it could get multitudes of graduate students their degrees by just analyzing this question or that question using the data that's already there. So I kind of hope, people are looking into that as a possibility because, there's so many questions that can be answered by looking at what beekeepers are really doing and then how is their overwintering or summer survival being affected. It's all there. It's just you need the manpower to sort it.
Maybe it is all there. I don't know. I don't know if they're collecting all of that or not.
Well, have you done the management survey?
I don't remember. Part of the problem is I have to actually get out to my apiary early enough in the year and get all that counted, and I'm busy doing other things at that time, so I never seem to get it in time. And then, but anyway, but whenever the topic comes up and if somebody posts it on the forum, you can easily come up with ways to say how these, if you're just comparing treatment to not treatment and survival rates, and that's all you got, treating, not treating, survival rates, well then it's easy to say, well, maybe most of the treatment-free people and new beekeepers don't really know what they're doing at all yet, and they just think they can throw them in a hive and they're gonna survive even though they're not treating them, and that's skewing my numbers. And then the treaters say, well, yeah, but there's all these people who are treating, but they don't know what they're doing, and they treat at the wrong time, and they give, or they put too much of it in, or they leave it too long, or they do whatever wrong, and so that's skewing my numbers. And you're right, it is.
Confirmation bias, yeah.
Well, they're both both those cases are true. There's the numbers are getting skewed by things that would be nice to quantify. If I've got an experienced beekeeper who's doing this, and an experienced beekeeper who's doing this, and this treatment-free person is pretty much following the protocols of what people who are succeeding are doing, and this person who's treating is pretty much following the protocols of people who are treating and succeeding, then I'd have more of an actual comparison that would be meaningful to me. But the problem is we throw in all these people who don't know what they're doing, people who are, people who think if a little is good, a lot, more is better, and so they're over-treating or overdosing them on formic and whatever. Who knows? But
Dousing them in sugar syrup. Saw one of those the other week.
So it would be nice to narrow that down a little more and try and eliminate the things that are skewing the numbers. Because what we really want to compare is if you're doing treatment-free in the way that the successful people are saying it ought to be done, are you succeeding? And if you're doing treating and you're doing it in the way that people who treat say it ought to be done, then are you succeeding? And then trying to eliminate the new beekeepers who don't really know what they're doing, the people who are overdoing it on either direction. I just think that's the numbers I'd like to get, but that's the numbers I'm hoping you'll get. Really comparing these two management systems or three management systems with it being done the way the people who do that would recommend it be done.
Well, for us though, it's really
doing.
just two management systems.
What? No, she's got three. I'm good with three. That's fine.
It's just two for me. When you mentioned stakeholders, what's at stake? That was my question about. You said stakeholders.
There are people who stand to win or lose by the results.
So there's three people who want their chosen method to win the contest.
I wouldn't put it that way.
Okay.
But they do, that's interesting you said that, because they do feel like it's a contest. Like, I could feel that the treatment-free people were scared that they were going to lose. Like, I heard statements like, well, if you do that, we're going to be set back and we'll never catch up. Kind of idea. Like, because at one time I was thinking that I would do foundationless. And that would have been true. Like, if you don't have foundation, you're set back in your comb building.
No, you're not.
I measured it in my preliminary study. I measured how much comb was there each week that I visited, and it took the ones that were given foundation filled 2 full boxes, a deep and a medium on average, and the foundationless filled a deep and half of a medium. So they went into winter with only 15 combs possible total to fill with food to store for the winter.
And how many hives were you doing?
There was 18 in each.
18 in each. That's
And
fair number.
It was
See, that's
clearly they were
contrary to
behind.
conventional wisdom at this point.
No, because building wax takes away your energy for creating honey and brood.
Well, what I mean is every foundationless beekeeper will tell you that they draw foundation faster.
Did they ever measure it?
Draw foundationless faster than foundation.
I've seen that on the web somewhere.
I can
I've
every
seen
day
it
almost.
all the time.
That's
Well, I measured it and it didn't happen.
Fair enough. I have no horse in the race, so.
And I enjoyed foundationless, to be honest with you. I loved foundationless. If I were going to have just my own bees for a hobby, I would totally go that way. It's just way cooler to watch, and
Well, the first guy to say that they'll grow foundationless and publish it anyway faster than foundation would be GM Doolittle. And he insisted that they're spending the same amount of energy no matter what. They will excrete wax scales whenever they're having their stomach constantly full of nectar no matter what. It has nothing to do with whether they're drawing comb or not. They're just constantly, and they're just falling on the bottom, or they're falling off while they're flying back out to the flowers, or they're actually turning them into comb, and that they're burning the same amount of energy regardless. It doesn't make any difference. And
I would like to read about that.
And he quotes 2 or 3 other beekeepers and scientists who thought he was correct. But
That seems wasteful.
I don't know if that's true or not. That was his observation.
It seems to me like there should be a trigger. Like we need to draw comb now, so the bees that are at the right stage should create it.
That's what I've always thought, and that may be true, but that was not his view of it.
That's what we were
His
always
view of
told
it
in
was
the
they
old
were-
beekeeping books.
His view of it is they're making scales all the time, and actually, you look on the bottom board sometime when they're in the middle of comb building. There's scales all over the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
But that's in the middle of comb building. What if you give them all drawn comb? Do you see that?
Oh no, I don't know. That's a good question, but from a productivity point of view, there's no doubt they do better with drawing comb than they do with no comb, because drawing comb takes time, and in the middle of a flow, they don't have time. There's a limited amount of time that this flow is going to continue, and they need somewhere to put the honey, and there's nowhere to put it. Then they have to spend their time building comb instead of foraging. And so there's no doubt having drawn comb makes a better crop of honey, but if it's a question of foundation or foundationless, I've never seen it made that much difference at all. But they always jump on the foundationless with so much more enthusiasm. They draw it quite quickly. They seem to hesitate a lot on the foundation. The worst of, if you're sticking with wax, the worst is when you cast a sheet. And I have a theory on why I think it's slower. If you just take you dip a board and you make a sheet. The wax is tough. When you run it through once you run it through a roller, it gets soft. It changes the nature of the wax so that it's more malleable after you run it through a roller. But if you just, the reason I bring this up is because some treatment-free people are doing this, and some people in Africa are doing this because they feel like they have to have foundation, but they don't want to influence the cell size, so they make a sheet of wax.
Why would
And
they
the
build
people
on
who've
there?
studied this say they actually build that slower than they do foundation. But I suspect part of that may be that the wax is tougher and it's harder for them to work it. And I think maybe if you ran it through a roller and squished it and made it softer, it may not be that much difference. I don't know. I'd be curious to know the answer to that question, because I suspect that it may be part of it, how malleable the wax is. But
What was your question? I don't remember now. How we got down this road.
oh, we got on the foundationless.
It's
well, the
recorded.
foundationless
It'll
was
be in
faster.
there.
I know, but I don't know if I answered it.
I'm pretty sure you did. What was my other question?
Oh, you taught stakeholders, something.
Yeah, what's
Oh, winning the race or whatever. Yeah.
Well,
I could call them an advisory board, but I don't feel like they're in charge of me.
But
An
maybe,
advisor?
But maybe stakeholders make sense, because even if they don't have a horse in the race, they do care about the outcome. Yeah, they care that the outcome is meaningful and that it's helpful. You know, all the people you're talking to, they are stakeholders in that sense, that
True.
they have a stake in the outcome, even if there isn't a win-lose. They want to know the answer, because it may affect decisions they make in their beekeeping. So I think stakeholders is a fair term for them. They aren't stakeholders in the sense, stakeholders in the sense, in a business sense, like a project management sense. They aren't necessarily people who how do I say that?
Should have had them put
It's
money
not like it's a
down.
contest.
Put money down.
It's not like it's a contest, but they care about the outcome, you know.
For myself, part of me would really like treatment-free beekeeping to win. Now, I have to temper that with the fact that, to me, winning is not going to look like somebody else winning. Like, for instance, at the end of the whole experiment, if 40% of the treatment-free colonies are still alive and 50% of the treated colonies are still alive, the treated people are going to call that a win. I'm also going to call that a win, because
It's not going to convince me to treat.
no, right, exactly.
Exactly.
No matter what the outcome, it's not going to convince me to change many, if any, of my methods because I've been doing this for a long time. I know what works and what doesn't work. If you got some other result, then to me that says there's some sort of bug in the system. And I know that's what everybody else is also thinking as well. So the outcome, honestly, the outcome of the project is really only going to change how I explain what I do and what basis, what rational basis or what experimental basis I can use to back up what I talk about.
But let's say it goes along with
Just being honest.
like what the Be Informed partnership has showed us. I think this last year anyway. I think the people who treated had slightly better success than the people who didn't treat. Now, I look at those numbers and it proves a couple of things to me. The first thing it proves to me is that all the people who tell me that all of my bees are going to die if I don't treat them, we've pretty much collected the data to prove that's not true. So that's a win to me.
Well, the talk that
I don't see that as a loss.
in the talk that I'm about to give, I actually show the graph of the average of all the loss rates, and it comes out between treating for varroa and not treating for varroa. It's like 34 to 42%. So it demonstrates what you're talking about is that assumption that treating means they survive and not treating means they die is simply false, and it's not even close.
Exactly.
There's only 10 or 12, 15, whatever, depending on the year, percentage points difference between treating for varroa and not treating for varroa.
So you're telling me I can put poison in my hive, I can contaminate my comb, I can shorten the lives of my queens, and I can lose a few percent less colonies. I'm not doing it. That's not happening.
And if you learn how to do it better, my loss rates have not been as high as the average in since like 2010,
and that's what I think is
2009.
I'd like to see included in that survey is the fact that I think people who are, I think it happens at both ends actually. I have to give credit. There are people who are treating who are doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
They're being more careful about what they're doing and they're probably succeeding better. But not treating, you need to do it well. But you're right. My losses have always been below whatever the state average was, even when I wasn't doing a thing. Even when I was out of the country for 3 years, my losses were lower than the state average. And then when I'm there managing them, they're significantly lower than the state average. Do I lose bees? Sure. Everybody's losing bees. I wish everybody would just fess up and admit bees die.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they die. Sometimes you treat them and they die, and sometimes you don't treat them and they die. But that doesn't mean they can't survive. Some of them survive. I don't know. I just don't. It's a very dishonest thing to act like everybody who doesn't treat loses all their bees, and everybody who treats all their bees survive, and that's basically the scenario they're trying to sell you. Mm-hmm. And just be honest. Okay, maybe there's no difference, or maybe yours are surviving at a slightly higher rate, but they're obviously they're people not treating and they're surviving. Just stop lying about it.
Well, and if you only have one hive and you spent $500 to set it up, then reducing that 10, 15 percentage point difference might be pretty important to you at that point. But again, treatment-free beekeepers, that's one of the things that I teach as hard as I can is that one hive is not going to work. 2 hives is probably not going to work very well. Go with 5 or more.
Well, if you're in town,
change the regime,
limited.
Change the method.
If you're in town and you're really limited, have 4. And then people tell me, well, the city will only let me have 2. I say, well, just put a piece of Luann on top of the first one and just stack up another one on top of that. Nobody will ever know the difference.
If you're smart,
That's brilliant.
put it on your roof, paint bricks on it, make it look like a backyard
you got
barbecue.
2 stacks of boxes in your
figure
yard.
something
Never
out.
mind that there's 4 colonies in it. It doesn't matter.
Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. Is there any? I'm in the intro to this. I'm going to tell people to go watch the video of the talk that you just gave, so they get some more background information, because we really didn't recap
Explain
a whole
it.
lot
No,
of
no.
the project, which is not particularly my interest. My interest is as as a beekeeping educator is the more the broad strokes to try and teach people how to keep bees, and so the minutia of the scientific method is not. I mean, I understand it. I've done it, but it's not terribly important for me to tell everybody else about that. But so I will tell them about that. But what else would you like people to know before we go that maybe hasn't maybe gotten missed in the last couple hours?
Jeez, I don't know.
What do you want people to know is why you're doing this? You're trying to prove something? Are you trying to disprove something? Are you just curious? Do you have any sort of ulterior motive?
No.
I would like to be rich. No.
We would all like to be rich. It's
No,
not happening.
I really hope that the different types of beekeepers can show each other a little bit more respect. Really, I'm doing this all side by side. Everything's going to get laid out. We're going to see what the numbers say. And then, when a fight begins, it'd be nice if people could refer back to this project and say, well, that's actually not true. So I'm excited to gather the data because, so when my first sort of slide toward organic was meeting some people, and they kept coming out with these things like, you can't use smoke because smoke hurts the pheromones and it disrupts foraging for the rest of the day. And other things like that. And I was like, why have I never read the scientific study that shows that? You know what I mean? So all these things that have been said, all these anecdotes, my one hive this, so that must be true. That's what I read when I just Googled organic beekeeping, and I didn't find what I was looking for, which was all this scientific data to back it up. So I know some people get mad when you say prove it, but that's what I'm here to do. I want to prove it. I want to show people, how these systems work and what the success rates are and how they compare to each other, in a scientific manner, so that we can say for sure with the numbers don't lie, and I want to just see how they compare to each other in real life. So I guess that's my motive.
Well, it sounds to me like you're going to solve the problem I'm seeing with like the Be Informed partnership, where all I know is these guys didn't treat and these guys did. What I really want to know is if this was done appropriately and this was done appropriately, how would they compare? And if you're being consistent and you're pretty much following the protocols of what people would be doing if they were doing those things, then you're going to answer that question.
Or at least just following the directions on the treatments properly.
Exactly. But see, I don't know that when somebody just says, I treated and my bees died. I don't know if they follow them properly. And I'd like to know that. I'd like to know if they were following them properly, how many would have died. That's what I want to know. Because actually, if you're not following them properly, that's really not of interest to me. Although it might be nice to know how many people aren't following them properly. But I really want to know if you were doing it properly, how many would have died. And if you're doing treatment free, the way most people who are succeeding are doing it, how many would have died. Mm-hmm. So instead of the extremist who's not going to ever give them a drop of honey, even though they stole or a drop of syrup, even though they stole all their honey before winter got there, comparing them along with the people who are actually making sure they're going into winter with enough to live on. I'd like to sort that out. I think you're going to sort that out.
So what you're saying is you're a uniter, not a divider.
I am a uniter.
Where can people find your work?
Well, I'm part of the Lopez Uribe Lab at Penn State, so you can look up lopezuribelab.com, and my project is called the COMB Project, Conventional and Organic Management of Bees. So it falls under the category of honeybee health research on the website.
And I will put links in the show notes to both the video and the audio, depending on which gets posted where, so people can find that. Mike, are you doing bee camp again this year?
I am.
How can people find that?
If you go to bushfarms.com and click on beekeeping, and there's a link up near the top on the left that says Bee Camp, and I think there's another one out in the middle somewhere about it. It'll take you to the page with all the details on that.
And you have spots left? Like, has it filled up?
I do at this point in time, but it usually starts filling up pretty fast now. I try and limit it to 20 people because I figure I'm trying to actually do hands-on, get around the hive, do stuff. And once you get over 20, it's really difficult
to lose track of everybody or
to
somebody.
Yeah, it gets difficult to try and teach a group bigger than that hands-on stuff. So.
Well, great. Well, thanks to both of you for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate having you. I'm definitely going to try and keep up with this project in the future as it goes along and see how it turns out or see how it's turning out. Maybe if it doesn't go the right way, I'll ignore it and just stop talking about it. But no, I'm definitely going to, no matter how it turns out, I'm going to be interested in the results because I want to prove something. I'm not sure, it doesn't matter necessarily what, but I want to prove something.
Well, I suspect that your answer is going to be that the differences of survival in all of these are not as significant as everybody on all these sides think. And I hope, of course, that it'll show that not treating on small cell is at least somewhat successful at best, or at worst, and at best that it's more successful. But either way, the fact is that it is succeeding. I have no doubt it's not gonna fail. Well, bees are really unpredictable. The bears might eat all of them, and we may not find out.
I'm putting up so many bear fences.
There's just so many weird little things that can go wrong.
That's why we have replication. Yep.
And that's really, the fact that you have them in different locations kind of averages things out, but it also gives you a little insurance. So
absolutely,
that's a good thing, definitely. So I'm sure nothing's going to happen that anybody would call a failure, because
I don't like the way this is ending right now.
No, I mean, as far as we're going to be all disappointed because the treatment people came out a little ahead, or the treatment people are going to be all disappointed because the treatment-free people came out a little ahead. The fact is, I think they're all probably not going to be that off from each other myself. But
I mean, like I said, if 40% of the untreated hives survive to the end, to me that's successful because it's not about numbers. It's not about lost numbers. It's about sustainable population that's dealing with its problems, and once the problems are figured out, they'll come back and they'll figure out their thing, which is why I hope it goes more than 2 years. If you can keep, if you could get it up to 5 years or something, maybe you might taper off some of the testing toward the end as it becomes less important or useful just for labor, but to see how they survive long term.
Well, back to your, let's say 40% of the not treated ones survive, and let's say the treated ones are doing a little better. The fact is, the long-term sustainable solution to the problem of varroa is not treating, because treating is not a sustainable solution. So even if not treating right now isn't doing as well as treating right now, they're surviving. And if we would all stop treating, those numbers would improve rapidly when those genetics are not getting all watered down by bees that can't survive without treatments. So it proves that it's doable to quit treating, and we could solve this whole thing. And I've heard Marla say this. I've heard Dr. Marion Ellis say this. I've heard at least a couple other bee scientists say this, that if we had never treated for varroa, we'd already be past this. It would already been solved. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why we're not. I guess I do know why we're not willing to do this. But when you got 10,000 hives, you're not willing to take those kind of losses. But
to me, where the rubber really meets the road is if you get to the end of the project, say maybe you make it 4 years, then you stop treating everybody, and then see what happens. Because the treatment-free guys are going to keep doing the thing, everybody else is going to. To me, that's always the final thing. What happens when the killer virus or zombie apocalypse happens and there's no more humans to take care of the bees? The treatment-free bees are going to be the same as they were the whole time along. The treated bees are going to have a problem. That's where, to me, where it makes
So your goal is to have bees that can survive a zombie apocalypse.
That's essential.
That
yes.
is awesome.
For lack of a better way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I always talk about. Like when I crashed my motorcycle and broke my foot. My bees are fine. They didn't miss me. They don't care. I'm just the guy that the hairless ape who shows up and messes around every month or so.
Bees need beekeepers like a fish needs a bicycle. Right?
Exactly. All right. Well, let's see. I guess we got a little bit before I'm up for my next talk. I'm going to be giving a talk about. It's going to be a hostile questions talk, but I've included some screen captures of some things that I've seen on the internet, which people were doing shameful stuff to other people. So talking about the treating beekeepers treating the non-treating beekeepers. So look for that video coming up on the YouTube page, and thank you guys for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.